discussed lots of ways to sort of embellish basic rhythm patterns. But one key technique that you can't leave out when you're talking about bluegrass rhythm and what makes bluegrass rhythm specific is the G run. And it sort of goes all the way back. Again, we talked about sort of days of country music and bluegrass before there was, big ensembles and big bass and all this kind of stuff, and how rhythm guitar was really, the main rhythmic element of an ensemble. And so we've talked about alternate bass notes and roots and fifths and different techniques that you can apply within a bar to kind of enhance the overall picture. And we're breaking things down to kind of key elements and working towards putting all this together into some tunes later on. But here's one more technique that I want to isolate. It's the G run, and it's sort of goes back. I think one of the first recorded versions that I'm aware of. You hear it a lot in old country music as far as bluegrass specifically. Bill Monroe actually played a version of it when he was on the Grand Ole Opry in 1939. He recorded a version of Mule Skinner Blues, and that's one of the earliest versions you can actually hear the G run applied in bluegrass. And another player that kind of put it on the map, if you will, for bluegrass rhythm playing was Lester Flatt. And it's good to start with him because he had one of the more basic forms of it. You might see, if you're aware of it, you'll see all different kind of ways to do it. And the Lester Flatt version, if you create again, we've got our alternate bass, G, boom, chuck, strumming, all kinds of everything we've talked about to now working. Lester would just play, so at the end of 2 bars. So he sort of builds to the second fret of the D string, the E, into the open G. And what it does, it defines the end of this phrase. So a way to practice the Lester Flatt version, we're going to apply this to all these other ones, is to imagine we're at the end of a verse or a chorus. So we play a G, walk to a D. That's a big component of bluegrass rhythm. And it kind of defines the next. We've talked about how good musical flat picking and bluegrass rhythm. Is try to make the rhythm as obvious as possible and to do things with the guitar to really dictate where the time is and the feel of the things. And so that's the purpose of the G run. Really is to sort of mark the end of phrases, let a listener, let other people in the band know. It sort of further solidifies the time. So that's the basic Lester version, Lester Flatt. An expanded version of that is, and we'll isolate it, starts on the open A, and it uses some of our picking techniques that we've used up till now. Is the lick there, and so that's done by sliding in. Playing the open A string, sliding in from the first fret to the second fret. And then you got an upstroke on the D, and then a pull off from fretted E to open D again, and then a rest stroke into G. So it's a way bluegrass rhythm suddenly employs a lot of the single note flat picking stuff we've been talking about. So. If you listen to Del McCoury, he came along and we've talked about voicings and how this chord sort of sounds a certain way, big and full, more happy kind of sounding thing, and as opposed to this version, a little meaner, a little more to the point. And what Del McCoury did, and other guys around that time, in the 50s and 60s when bluegrass was kind of moving on. Instead of using the E note, Del McCoury played an F note, which added a whole blues element to the G run. You can hear the difference, and again, one of the things we're trying to build here is sort of a sense about how to use these aspects in rhythm guitar. And we're going to put them all into use here in a minute. We're continuing to break things down. That's the difference in sound, though. And that's all based out of that major and pentatonic kind of ideas with G. Sort of basically the G run is sort of built out of a pentatonic scale that we've already talked about. If you don't want to do the pull off, you don't have to. And so the F note, you can hear the difference when you isolate both of them together, and how just one note difference sort of changes the whole character of that kind of lick. But again, the why you use them doesn't change. It's to mark the end of if you've got a 4-bar line, you've got a 1, 5, and then 2 bars of 1. And the point is to try to make them strong. They need to cut through the band, and so that's we're building technique and trying to build strength here, and so you don't want to overplay them, but isolating these movements. You'll when you go back and forth like that, you want to feel, if you practice this way, you want to feel like the G run has its own sort of internal rhythm. Because it's sort of leading to home. A lot of this stuff we're going to get into later talks about leading back to our concept of where the root is, and all those ascending notes lead to that final big pop of G at the end of the phrase, and that's really what especially when you see Jimmy Martin and some of the classic bluegrass rhythm players, they really had an attitude behind it, and I encourage you to go listen and try to be aware of all the different sounds of that. Another way, we'll get into just a couple more little things. There are ways if you're playing in the key of D. We talked about just the basic pentatonic idea of a G run. In D, you have one built in right there. The same basic form with your left hand. It's just everything is moved a string lower. So using that same 4-bar idea. Or there's different ways. Here's another way. Or the Del McCoury attitude with adding the blues note, playing a C. You can make choices. You can choose, I'll give you the freedom to use those pull-offs or not. Or so there's different ways to do it. And as we grow into this and we find different ways, it's to me it's kind of neat to discover different ways to kind of do things like this, because ultimately it kind of strengthens your sense of how rhythm can be used and how it can really enhance wherever you're playing. And so but the G run is probably the most important element to define bluegrass rhythm as a style.